I am a female in my early 20s, accompanied by my small dog. We were heading into the woods for a camping trip when we encountered something truly bizarre. As my dog and I were hiking, trying to find a suitable spot to set up our tent for the night, he suddenly started barking at something in the bushes. I couldn't see what it was at all, but I assumed it was just an animal or something small. I pulled him away, and we continued our hike. Upon reaching an open clearing, we pitched a tent, had a meal, and settled in to sleep. However, I woke up around 2 or 3 a.m. to the sound of my dog growling. He was standing and staring, not at me, but towards the opening of the tent. When I looked in that direction, I saw the zipper slowly moving down, as if someone were opening the tent from the outside. Startled, I immediately shouted, "Hey you!" The atmosphere grew eerily quiet, as if whatever was outside had frozen and stopped making any sound. Terrified, I lay there in bed for what felt like an eternity. Suddenly, I heard someone or something running circles around the tent multiple times, and then it darted into the woods, disappearing for the rest of the night. Keep in mind that this was in the middle of nowhere. The nearest road or house was miles away. In the morning, I hastily packed up our things, grabbed my dog, and we hiked quickly back to the car. We drove away from there without any intention of returning. Upon reaching home, I searched the internet for information about the forest where my dog and I had this strange encounter. To my shock, I discovered that many others had gone through similar experiences, and some had even seen the entity responsible. What they described was something inhuman, tall and skinny, with disproportionately long legs and arms. When they saw it flee into the woods, it moved on all fours, but in a backward manner. As I read their accounts, a chilling sensation ran down my spine, and fear gripped me. Nevertheless, I felt a mixture of relief and terror, knowing we had managed to escape that situation unharmed. It was a nice autumn night, and my family and I decided to have a campfire. We went outside after it was dark and we were roasting marshmallows and making s'mores while we sat around the campfire talking. The campfire was at the very edge of the woods by our playground, which was quite far from our house since we had a lot of acres. We had spent time outside at night before and everything was okay. But this night we spent a few hours outside and then suddenly we heard something in the woods. We heard leaves crunching and a stick break. We thought it was an animal, so we ignored it. We went back to talking and then we heard it again. It sounded like it was getting closer and closer. The footsteps didn't sound like an animal, and instead it sounded like a human. Then we heard someone cough in the woods. My family and I all stood there in silence because we were freaked out. We shined our flashlights into the woods to see who or what was there. We saw a dark figure of a man hide behind a tree. They were watching us. We left everything outside and ran as fast as we could back to the house. Once we were inside our house, we locked all the doors and windows. My family and I thought that the person watching us this time was the same person as the one that was following my sister and I while we were hiking. We were all scared, and still to this day I have no idea who that was watching us or what they would have done to us if we hadn't ran away. After this we never had a campfire at night ever again, and instead we did it during the daytime. Decided to drive to the largest forest in my county in hopes of getting back in touch with nature. Needing to clear my head, I asked the local forestry office the best place for a quick walk off of the main trails and was directed to this picturesque spot a little ways down the road. No reception, with the rare bit of blue sky we get in the UK. I was glad I made this spontaneous trip, and as I walked further down the path I saw a clearing in the trees to my right. Since the plan was to get closer with nature, I ventured into the trees off the beaten path. It was great. I explored the area, listened to the birds as they swooped from branch to branch. Even got a good 5 minutes of meditation in, before I heard what sounded like two animals fighting. I assumed they were just foxes and moved on. I unexpectedly reached this sand road as I emerged from the trees, but decided to walk along it for a moment as I scanned for an entry into the forest on the other side of the road. But as I looked around, I spotted a bra dangling from a bush near the road. Now, I'm aware people go to the forest for all sorts of reasons, but this did put me slightly on edge. As I turned around, I heard an electric car making its way up the road. By the time I heard it, it was less than 300 yards away. My instincts told me to hide or just avoid being seen, but there was no time, so I simply gave a polite nod as he passed and made my way in the opposite direction. He parks up behind me, just out of view. I begin to make my way off of the road, intending to go explore further, but when I saw the car, for a moment, doing a 180 turn then parking again, something told me to turn around and go back the way I came. As I made my way back onto the road, I spot this man in a white shirt behind the bush the bra was hanging from. He was going in the direction I just changed course from. I crossed the road and made my way back into the forest I had arrived on the sand road from. When I got slightly further in, I turned around to check if the man continued in the opposite direction, but he didn't. Instead, I see he has also crossed the road and is making his way into the part of the woods I entered. By this point, I knew I was being followed. There was no way he coincidentally went one way then turned to head into this part of the forest that I entered. But I kept my pace brisk, rather than running. My physical health can go south quick, my knees are brittle and my ankles are weak. So rushing could cost me, especially since I still had to reach my car and drive away. As I traveled further, he was always following. Was cursing my luck as I made my way to the end of that section of the forest, just before the path that was after a large patch of grass and shrubbery. But as I looked back, I couldn't see him. I stopped for longer than I should have, scanning the trees and listening intently. But I hear nothing. See nothing. I make my way back onto the path with some relief and turn one last time to check the tree line. When I see he's not there, I begin considering I was overthinking the whole situation. But just as those thoughts cross my mind, I see the man emerge from the opposite side from where he was previously. At the edge of the tree line. He just stared at me. But I wasn't going to take any more chances, so I made my way down the path and back to my car, making sure to get out of there quickly, as I knew he would have to head down the same tight country road. I reported the man to the forestry office, but there wasn't much they could do. So that was it. When I paused at the tree line, when I couldn't see him. For him to have emerged from where he did when I had made it back to the path, he had to have approached from another angle. An angle that I admittedly wasn't checking. But I'm glad I never went further into the forest. I'm glad I followed my instincts. Otherwise, the only way back would have been through him. And God knows what his intentions were. This past weekend me and my partner decided to go to our usual camping spot. It's very low-key, never usually anyone up this mountain besides one or two people at a time, and even at that time they're miles away from your campground. It's not a well-known spot. This past weekend, just like every year, we brought my parents' little elderly dog. Set up camp, ate some food and drank some beer around the campsite. When we arrived prior to this, we scoped out the area to see how busy it was. There was absolutely nobody in sight. The entire mountain campgrounds were entirely empty. We're used to have one hunter or fisher in the area at least. We've never not seen at least one person the entire trip. So we sat around the fire, completely relaxed with my little dog nearby. When we decide to get into bed, my usually very complacent placid pup refuses to settle inside the tent. It's pretty hot this time of year, so we had the tent unzipped with just the mesh covering the opening to let some breeze in. But my pup was looking through the mesh and sniffing, zoning in on something entirely. We decide to get up and check out the camp for whatever he's looking at. We don't see anything, so we decide to sit by the fire to fire us out when my sleepy pup unsettles suddenly with his hackles straight up on end, growling a deep growl into one direction of the woods. We decided to grab the hunting knife and axe and listen. He's snarling and barking vigorously, which took us by surprise because he's been completely comfortable every other year. After a few hours of him acting on high alert, we decide to flip the truck lights on to illuminate our camp as we're surrounded by darkness. We were listening intently, trying to figure out what he's seeing or hearing. After a few minutes he lays down and alarms us again a few minutes later, startling us to the point we make a run for the truck by how aggressively my dog is warning something. We wait, hearts pounding inside the truck, trying to see what's out there. After 30 minutes we assume whatever it is has passed on. After we reposition ourselves in front of the fire again, my dog's hackles are up and we hear the loudest tree branch snap a mere 10 feet away from us in the pitch-black wilderness. Again we hop in the truck with the dog and decide we better leave. As earlier that night we were hearing wolves hunting for a few hours and their howls echoing through the woods. Our main concern was it being a cougar, as they're commonly seen in this area, and there had been a lot of attacks on unsuspecting victims. Our main thought was something was stalking us for a long time without moving on. We told my partner's parents that we decided it's better to be safe than sorry, and we were mocked extensively, but we were armed with very minimal weapons, not anything that would handle a mountain lion or a pack of wolves. We were called chicken shits the entire weekend and mocked over it. I also felt protective over my dog as he's very small.